The PowerPoint will be available on our website, which is listed here. We'll try to get that up soon after we get done with the presentation. And there will also be a recorded component that will be placed on the website as well. That should be able to go up within a day or two. I'm not really sure of the exact time frame, but I just want to let you know that that's going to be available. The purpose of the webinar, and this is in no particular order, is to provide you an overview of the application process and an overview of any updates that were included in the application, to review some important definitions, the application forms, and the allowable activities for the 2015 ESG funding. We're also going to discuss some changes that we implemented in-house. We're going to review the submission of the application on DCED's electronic single application and provide an opportunity for questions on any of the application guidelines or the overall program. There also may be some questions that you have that may not be related directly to the application submission, but may be related to the program overall, which could impact your application, so I want you to feel free to ask those questions as well. Right now we're going to go to the electronic submission of the application. These forms are essentially the forms that were used for the application webinar last year. So you may see some dates in there that say 2014 or some deadlines that are not valid for this program. Please do not pay attention to any of those dates or the time frame, just information that's being presented in terms of how to get to the electronic single application and how to submit it. So what you want to do is the first thing you want to do is go to DCED's website, which is www.newpa.com. And in the right-hand corner, there's a link for the single application. If you need additional information on funding, you see circled there, there's funding. You can go and get information on the program there as well. But what you want to do is click the single application page. And when you click the single application page, it'll bring you to the page that you now see on the screen. If you need additional information about the single application itself, you click on that link and it'll take you to another page that will give you some additional information. So once you click the registration, you want to log in. If you're not already a user on the system, if you're a new applicant or new applicant to DCED, you want to go over to the button that says register and register as a first-time user. If you're not a new applicant, then you just go to the login and use the username and password that you've already used in the past. So when you click the register, it's going to take you to the single application registration information page, and there you want to create a username and a password. It's also going to ask you for a security question, which you need to put in and provide an answer, and that'll be a way for you to retrieve your information if you ever forget it. All of the red diamonds on the page next to each of the boxes is required information. So if you don't have any of that filled out, you won't be able to move on to the next step. Then at the bottom of the page, you want to indicate whether or not you're a government entity. For the ESG program, you must be a government entity, so you want to make sure you click that box and then click Submit. Once you click Submit, it'll take you to this next page, and then you fill out the information, making sure you include your federal employee identification number, which is very important. Again, you have to click here whether you're a government entity, and then it asks you for some additional identifying information. You click the Submit button, which would take you to another page. Click the home page for a single application, or you can click the user settings, which would give you information about your single application account that you just created. Now here, under the project name is an example of what I was saying earlier. Please don't pay attention to the dates in there. You want to put your project name. You can enter, we can use the example that's listed here, Carbon County, 2015, ESG. Select your organization, and if you need help, there's a link here. If you need help submitting an application, press yes. If not, just select no. There'll be a drop-down button there. Once you finish with inputting all that information, you click Create a New Application. So you've set up your user account, and now you're going to go to submit the application for the funding. Okay, so the next page is to begin a new application. And then you can see here, it shows you that if you start an application and you don't complete it, it'll be listed at the bottom of the page. You always want to make sure you save your information. If you go off of a page or go away from your computer for a while, you want to make sure you just click Save. If you start an application and you're not going to submit it, then you can withdraw the application, or if you just need to get back to it later, click Edit, and then you can go and finish the application in order for it to be submitted. And here on the next page, it shows you that you have to save your information. So it says the application saves information as you click from tab to tab. So if you clicked any of those tabs, it will save the information for you. But if you're going to be away for a while, click Save. You can also print your application. It gives you the button up there where you can have the option to print. This next screen shows you where you put your information in order to apply. So again, here you're going to put ESG so that we know when it comes into our customer service area, they know to route that application to our office. And then if you need additional information about the program, you would click Program Finder. If not, you just move on to Apply, which is below, and you click the Apply link for ESG. If you don't see the Apply button, you don't have your user settings set up correctly, you must go back and set up your user settings. At any time during this process, if you run into any problems or you need any assistance, you can contact our Customer Service Center at 1-800-379-7448, and they are there to help you with the submission of any application that you submit to DCED. Also, in the box below where it says Emergency Solutions Grant Program, you see the deadline for applications is June 30th. It says 2014. Please ignore that. The deadline for the application is July 31st, 2015. So then the next few screens, it just takes you through the process of submitting and inputting your information. And again, the red diamonds in the page, you want to make sure you fill out those. Your information can be pre-populated. You have the option to do that with the user account information. You can click that button and it'll, the screens where you set up your user account, all that information will pre-populate into the application so that you don't have to retype it. But on the next page where it says enterprise type, that information doesn't pre-populate from the user settings, so you'll have to make sure you check all the information that apply, and then you click continue to move on to the next slide. Okay. So on this next slide, then you can see you've created a web application for the ESG program, and it'll give you a web application number. You want to make sure you keep that as a reference. Anytime you go back into the system, you'll be able to pull up your application from the web application number. And here it shows you that the project name will be populated when you create the application if you click that button that we discussed before. The application then takes you to a program budget page, and you would enter your information regarding your budget. Now here it shows you an example of what our single application project budgets are. It's just a small sample of what's included in a single application, but what you want to do is go down to the category that says Other, and you want to make sure under Other you put the activity types and the amount that you're requesting from DCED for each of those eligible activities for ESG. So for instance, if you're applying for street operations, if you're applying for street outreach and emergency shelter, you just put street outreach, $50,000, emergency shelter, $100,000, whatever it is you're applying for. If it's rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention, in these boxes under Other, do not break them down to the different categories under each one. Just put the total that you're requesting in each of the eligible activities. So you wouldn't list financial assistance, services, or rental assistance. It would just say rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention. So you have several categories, several activities that you can apply for, and they would be street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, HMIS, and administration. So those are the only categories that would appear in the Other box. And then you want to enter the amount that you're requesting next to that. And then the second column, you would enter, the second column where you can enter your finance information, you would put your match dollar. And remember, ESG requires a dollar-for-dollar match. Okay, on the next slide, you have to select the appropriate basis of your costs and then include your budget narrative. This box for the budget narrative doesn't give you a lot of space, so you're just going to summarize your program. You have a character count of about 2,000, so make sure that you are able to include all of the pertinent information regarding your program in that box. The next slide for the application submission takes you to the Addenda page where you can download any links, the document links related to the application. You also have the opportunity to upload all your files that need to be attached. And we've provided you with different boxes, 4 different boxes where you can attach files to, and just know that there's file size limitations on that as well. So try not to include unnecessary information or things that we did not ask for in the application, but just include specifically what we're asking you to provide. On the next screen, it just shows your certifications, the information. You click any of the links and go directly to the tab where the required information is missing. So it does a balance and check in the single application, and if you miss something, it'll let you know because you won't be able to submit the application. Next page is certification. You want to check the box where it says DCED electronic signature. We've made the signature page electronic, but you still have to send in the hard copy with the original signature on it. Also, you want to type your name in the box because that'll be your signature, and then click the box indicating that you're authorized representative of the local government organization, indicating that you have authority to submit the application on behalf of that agency. Then you click the last box that says DCED Electronic Attachment Agreement, and then you can go to submit for the application. On the next page, it provides you with some documentation you want to make sure you keep copies of, the web application ID. Once you submit your your single application to DCED, it'll create a single application number. This essentially tells us when you submitted your application. The 2014 will now say 2015. If you entered it on June 30th, it'll say 0630, and the last 4 digits, I believe, is related to the time that you submitted the application. This page also gives you the opportunity to print a single application page in its entirety. You want to do that so you have documentation of the information that you submitted to DCED. In case there's any problems with your application, you have verification that the information was submitted and submitted on time. And here again, it tells you that the signature page is required to be mailed with additional information that we'll go over later. So you want to make sure you submit the signature page with the original signature. Once you submit the application, you won't be permitted to make any changes electronically. You'd have to contact our customer service center. Again, the number is 1-800-379-7448, and the customer service office will make any of the changes to the application that you may need. I'm going to pause for a second. If people have questions related to the submission of the single application, if you can use the chat box. And
so, slide 14, does the financial information include the match amount, or is it only the ESG requested amount?
It would include your ESG and your match. There's a column for your Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and you would include the amount that you're requesting under that column. And then the next column, we just have it listed here as the a bank loan local funding source. But if it's a federal source, state source, whatever, that you would just include it here and then include all of your match. And just remember that your match funds do not have to mirror your requested activities. So as long as the match is an eligible activity, it can fall under any of the activities that are allowable in ESG. It doesn't necessarily have to be dollar for each category.
Another question is, did you say administration is a category?
Administration is a category under ESG. You're allowed to apply for 3.75% of the amount you're requesting. If anyone should think of any more questions as related to the submission of the application, you can still submit those through the chat box, and we'll provide you an answer as we go through the program information of the application. I'm going to start by going over some of the changes that we made to the application. As you can see, the contracts previously had been somewhere between 22 and 24 months. We are now shortening the contract process, so contracts are now going to be 18 months, and there will be no extensions on that time frame. If you're granted an award, you have 18 months to get your expenditures completed, including your drawdown. You have 18 months to get your expenditures completed, and then you'll have 60 days to finalize your invoices and have them submitted to DCED so that we can get them paid. As far as the invoices, just remember that regardless of when you get paid by DCED, you need to have your sub-vendors paid within 30 days of the time frame that they submit the invoice to you. So if they submit an invoice to you and you take, the 60 days to submit it to us, you still have to pay them within the 30 days. And then we can't pay you until we verify that the information in the invoice is correct. So you want to make sure that if you accept the invoice from one of your sub-recipients, that you check it and make sure that all the information in the invoice is valid and that you can go ahead and pay it, because once it gets to us, you may be delayed in getting your reimbursement if all the information is not correct. Next change is that we're giving greater priority to applicants who coordinate their rapid rehousing efforts with the continuum of care for chronically homeless, veterans, and families with children. In previous applications, you only had to focus your application on those priority areas. This time you have to focus your application on those priority areas as well as coordinate your efforts with the continuum of care. The amount that can be applied for by applicants is $25,000. There was a minimum of $50,000 in the past. We recognize that some agencies need a lower amount in order to be able to continue to provide services and not turn money back. So we adjusted the minimum requirement to $25,000. Just an FYI for you, our website is going to be updated. Someone brought to my attention that our website still indicated that the minimum amount to be applied for was $50,000. We're in the process, if it hasn't happened already, we're in the process of updating the website. So our website is incorrect. The minimum to apply for is $25,000. Additional changes is that there is no longer a 2-year ban on applying for funds. However, if you're going to apply, you must have 75% of your previous ESG funds expended and invoiced at the time the application is submitted. DCED is now requiring when agencies submit their annual fiscal status report and their closeout report of the contract that you provide a success story. So we want to focus more on the successes of the program, and you're going to have to provide that for us throughout the contract period. Another change is that our regional staff will be heavily involved with the agencies who are funded.
Spend your deadlines, that's on page 22. Again, we do have the 18-month requirement now. So DCED is requiring all subrecipients to expend 50% of their award within 12 months of the date of the contract with the Commonwealth. 100% of the grant must be occurred within 18 months of the signing of the grant agreement. Grantees will have 60 days from the end of the contract to submit all invoices to DCED.
So DCED anticipates receiving for its 2015 allocation approximately $5,129,842. So our guidelines are dated for June 2015. And again, the applications are due July 31st, 2015 by 5 p.m. We've already reviewed the electronic submission of the single application. You want to make sure you submit a complete application. And then the hard copy of the signature page, the resolution, and the statement of assurances must also be postmarked by that date. Please do not submit hard copies of the application. The only thing we want you to submit are the things I just said. The signature page, the resolution, and the statement of assurances should be submitted by mail, and everything else should be submitted through our electronic single application. We will not accept any applications after July 31st. We can't actually release the award letters until after we get our award letter from HUD. We are planning to have all of the applications reviewed and awards. We will know what the awards will be, but we won't be able to release that information to you until we get that letter from HUD. And again, all of the activities that fall under ESG are eligible for funding. What we've had in the past is many of our grantees would prefer to use the ESG funds for homelessness prevention, but our priority is rapid rehousing. We are going to give greater priority to applicants who apply for rapid rehousing funds for those who are chronically homeless, homeless vets, and homeless families with children. Remember, the caveat is that you must coordinate your efforts with the continuum of care for the rapid rehousing. and then the rapid rehousing will receive priority. We anticipate using at least 45% of our allocation, which doesn't include the admin and HMIS, for rapid rehousing. However, if we need to adjust that, we will. To ensure that we meet our goal of the 45%, applicants applying for rapid rehousing will receive priority. In order to maintain adequate flexibility in responding to your local needs, which we understand is different across the state, we're not establishing any sub-priorities by activity types. So even if the applicant's grant proposal addresses DCED's priorities for ESG funding, you have to demonstrate the intent and capacity to fulfill the program requirement. Eligible applicants for the ESG program are any general purpose units of local government, including cities, boroughs, townships, towns, counties, home rule municipalities, and communities that desire to apply on behalf of other municipalities. Local governments must apply on behalf of all nonprofit organizations. Nonprofits are not eligible applicants, and they cannot sign any of the application documents. Priority will be given to non-entitlement jurisdictions. However, DCED will consider funding applications received from all eligible government jurisdictions as listed above, and then the minimum grant request is $25,000. Housing and or redevelopment authorities may not be administrators of ESG funds unless a competitive bidding process has been completed and documentation of the process is included in the files. The application should indicate if another agency is administering the grant. And if the process has already been completed prior to the application submission, then you have to submit a copy of the agreement with your application. The subrecipient cannot relinquish its responsibilities for compliance if awarded funds. We're using the term subrecipient for DCED is the grantee to HUD, and then anyone that we fund under ESG would be a subrecipient for us, and then you all would have recipients as well. But in this instance, I'm using the word subrecipient to respond to any local government entity that would apply for funds. Essentially, as a local government entity applying for funds, regardless of if you allow another agency to be the administrator of the funds, you're still responsible for compliance and any monitoring issues that are determined when we come out to monitor. After an award, you're required to maintain your records, all records for the program for a minimum of 5 years. That is inclusive of all of the invoices that submitted to us. Some agencies have indicated that DCED has copies of the invoice. That's okay, but you're still required as the subrecipient to maintain all of your documentation for 5 years after we close out the program. And the program will not be closed out until it's monitored. And once we close out the monitoring, and then we give you an official closeout letter, that's the date that you start your 5-year period. Okay, correction, MJ wants to jump in?
The date will be determined when the program gets closed out by HUD.
So essentially you have to maintain your records for eternity.
Well, they keep saying they're going to come out with closeout regulations. So
the subrecipient responsibilities, you're responsible to, if you're awarded a grant, you're responsible to enter into a contract with the Commonwealth of PA. You're responsible for entering into agreements with agencies or third-party contractors, delineating responsibilities and reimbursement for services. So you should have some written procedures on how you are going to manage this program and how you are going to manage the funds. You're responsible for having meaningful oversight and monitoring of all your vendors, ensuring that they are in compliance with the program. You want to ensure that the required match is provided. If you pass that responsibility on to your vendors or your subrecipients, you want to check to make sure they have the match and that they're using it, and you want to maintain all that documentation in the files. You must use an HMIS or comparable client-level database that's currently adopted by the Continuum of Care. And anyone applying for ESG funds, you need to coordinate with the Continuum of Care. I cannot stress that enough. If you submit an application and you haven't coordinated with your Continuum of Care, you're going to lose points on the application. Also, you're responsible for completing all reports and closeouts as directed by the Commonwealth. If you have more than one vendor, then these reports should be collated and basically submitted to us as one subrecipient. Instead of submitting multiple reports, you gather that information, put it all together, and submit it on behalf of your county, your borough, your whatever local government entity which was funded. Street outreach is funding used for the cost of providing essential services necessary to reach out to unsheltered homeless people, connect them with emergency shelter, housing, or critical services, and provide urgent, non-facility-based care to unsheltered homeless people who are unwilling or unable to access emergency shelter, housing, or an appropriate health facility. I want to stress that the services under street outreach should be provided on the street where the client is considering their place of residence. I use that term loosely, but wherever they are, that is where the services are provided. There is no eligible activity for general outreach and engagement about the program. However, it is critical that you do outreach so your communities are aware of available services, and funding for any outreach and engagement activities may be taken from your administration line item. Emergency shelter. Any facility where the primary purpose of which is to provide a temporary shelter for the homeless in general or for specific populations of the homeless, and which does not require occupants to sign leases or occupancy agreements. In the past, there was some confusion as to whether or not transitional shelters could apply for funds, and if you did receive funds in the 2010 year, you still may apply for, you're still eligible to apply for funds. Rapid rehousing. Definition is to provide housing, relocation, and stabilization services and short-term and or medium-term rental assistance necessary to help a homeless individual or family move as quickly as possible into permanent housing and achieve stability in their housing. Homelessness prevention, provide housing, relocation, and stabilization services and short and or medium-term rental assistance necessary to prevent an individual or family from moving into an emergency shelter or another place.
Okay, overview of homeless definition. Homeless definition has 4 categories. Literally homeless individuals / families. Individuals, families who imminently within 14 days lose their primary nighttime residence with no subsequent residence, resource, or support networks. Unaccompanied youth or families with children / youth who meet the homeless definition under another federal statute and 3 additional criteria. Individual families fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence with no subsequent residence, resources, or support networks. Eligibility determination by ESG components. Street outreach. Category 1, literally homeless. Category 4, fleeing, attempting to flee domestic violence where the individual or family also meets the criteria for Category 1. Street outreach projects have the following additional limitation on eligibility within Category 1. Individuals and families must be living on the street or other places not meant for human habitation and be unwilling or unable to access service in emergency shelters. Eligibility determination by ESG components. Emergency shelter, Category 1, literally homeless. Category 2, imminent risk of homelessness. Category 3, homeless under other federal statutes. Category 4, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. Eligibility determination by ESG components for rapid rehousing. Category 1, literally homeless. Category 4, fleeing, attempting to flee, DV, where the individuals or family also meet the criteria for Category 1. Homelessness prevention. Immediate risk of homeless under other federal statutes, fleeing, attempting to flee domestic violence. Okay, overview of at-risk determination. Individuals and families who are defined as at risk of homelessness are eligible for assistance in homeless prevention funding only. At risk of homelessness definition has 3 requirements applicable for individuals and families. Have annual income below 30% of AMI, and do not have sufficient resources or support networks immediately available to prevent them from moving to an emergency shelter, and meet at least one of the following 7 conditions. Has moved because of economic reasons 2 or more times during the 60 days immediately preceding the application for assistance, or is living in the home of another because of economic hardship, or has been notified that the right to occupy their current housing or living situation will be terminated within 21 days after the date of application for assistance. Lives in a hotel or motel and the cost is not paid for a charitable organization or by a federal, state, or local government program for low-income individuals. E, lives in a single-room occupancy or efficiency apartment unit in which there resides more than 2 persons, or lives in a larger housing unit in which this resides more than 1.5 persons per room, or exiting a public-funded institution or system of care. Otherwise, living in housing that has characteristics associated with instability and an increased risk of homelessness. Unaccompanied children youth who qualified under federal statutes. Children/youth who qualified under Education for Children and Youth Program, 7252 McKinney-Vito Act, and the parents or guardians of that child/youth is living with him or her.
ESG details, allowable administration is 7.5%. DCED will split this with the grantee. Applicants may receive up to 3.75% of their total grant request. Required match of 100% in activities eligible under ESG, and must use the homelessness definition as published in the Federal Register on December 5th, 2011. Continuing with ESG details, IDIS, grantees are no longer able to set up activities or draw down funds in IDIS. Invoices are submitted with accompanying documentation to DCED for review. Once DCED has a complete and acceptable invoice, the department will have 30 days to provide the applicant with reimbursement for incurred costs. The applicant also has 30 days to pay the vendor upon approval of their invoice. ESG is a reimbursable program, and all costs must be incurred prior to invoicing. Under shelter component, all requests are for a maximum of 18-month period. DCED may choose to fund for 1 year, depending on the amount of applications received and available funding. Essential services may be provided to individuals and families who are in an emergency shelter. However, you must request essential services in the application. Operation costs no longer have caps on the salary amount for staff working in the shelter. This does not mean the agency operating shelter, but the actual staff of the shelter. Renovation is no longer a priority for the ESG program. Pennsylvania has placed the following documented needs as a priority for renovation: code deficiencies, increase in bed capacity, health and safety issues, ADA compliance, energy conservation. Sign contracts with firms with firms doing the renovation, conservation, or material purchase must be submitted to DCED within the first 9 months of the contract. Work should be completed within the first 15 months of the contract.
First question is, for projects that are requesting funding for emergency shelter operations, this funding is needed for a full year or 2 years. Since funding is just 18 months, how will the unfunded 6 months be handled? Essentially, it's your responsibility as the agency to ensure that you have funds available for a 2-year commitment for your program. We set the grant contract period for 18 months. That's all DCED is accepting responsibility for. Anything beyond that, your agency will need to find a way to provide additional funds to stay open. The other thing is that you have to remember that this is a competitive grant process, and there is no guarantee of funding from year to year. So even if you were not funded through ESG, you have to find a way to keep your shelter open.
Yeah, and this is MJ. I just want to step in here. The reason why we put in the 18-month clause is because we have a lot of money that we're recapturing at the end of the contract. And after 11 and 12, we had over $815,000 that we recaptured. Luckily, HUD allowed us to roll that into our 14 allocation, but we're not going to always have that, and also we are going to be fined have a finding because that money had to be recaptured. So what we did, we are changing the contract period time so that this money gets used, and also it's on the street and we're getting it to the most needy. Also, to remember is that we get ESG every year. So, you know, maybe you wanted to, put your plan, look at your planning for your operations on a yearly basis and make your amount smaller when you apply and only apply for a month's worth or for a year's worth. That way you know you're going to get the money spent. You'll have it 75% spent by the time we're looking at the next round of applications, and it'll continue. I do have to reinforce what Madra said. This is a competitive program. There is no guarantee you will get money funding each time you put in your funding. So it is not to be considered your sole source of operations.
And just to add on to what MJ was saying, the money that we collect back, it's usually rapid rehousing funds or homelessness prevention. It's very rare, although it has happened, but it is very rare that we would get any shelter funds back. So even if we recapture funds from another agency, we wouldn't be able to get that money back out on the street for a shelter because that money was designated for rapid rehousing. The other thing is there was a question about whether or not that money can be used, that the extra 5 months could be used as match, and the answer is no, because the match has to occur during the contract period. The other question that we had is if the application is for different activities than the 2014 application, is there still a 75% requirement, and is that requirement for year one of a 2-year request? Basically, you still would not be able to apply for funding if you don't have 75% of your expenditures. If you have a 2-year request and you spend all of your money in year one, we're fine with that. I mean, you probably want to plan a little better, but then you also don't necessarily know what the needs are going to be in your area, so it's possible to spend all of that money. If you're at the 75% requirement, then yes, you can apply, but if you're not, even if it's for a different shelter, you cannot apply for funds. It's by grantee, or as I used the term before, subrecipient, because you would be a subrecipient of DCED. The applicant's transitional housing was supported in part by ESG in 2010. Can transitional housing be considered as match for 2014 ESG? And the answer is yes. Back to the ESG eligible activities for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Under financial services or financial assistance, you can do moving costs, rent application fees, security deposits, last month's rent, utility deposits. David, you move through this. Utility deposits and utility payments. Under services, housing search and placement, housing stability case management, mediation and legal services, credit repair, budgeting, money management, and that would all be case management. No financial assistance is provided to a household for a purpose and time period supported if they're supported by another public source. Short-term or medium-term rental assistance can be up to 3 months. Short-term assistance can be up to 3 months. Medium-term assistance can be up to 24 months within a 3-year period. You must have a lease between the program participant and the landlord. A rental assistance agreement must be in place between the subrecipient or the third-party contractor and the housing owner, which is the landlord. Rent restrictions apply for all assisted units, which includes fair market rent determination. You must also do a habitability inspection on the unit, and lead-based paint inspections are required. Rental arrearages can be paid for up to 6 months, but only as a one-time payment. Eligible activities under HMIS. The ESG subrecipients and or third-party contractors must participate in HMIS, providing regular and consistent data on client service delivery. Certain HMIS costs as defined by regulation are eligible under the program. Eligible activities under administration. As I stated earlier, you may apply for up to 3.75% of your grant request, and those activities will include general management, oversight, and coordination of the grant, which would be salaries, wages, and related costs of the staff or other staff engaged in program administration. Travel costs, but they must be in accordance with the DCED policy, and if anyone needs that policy, we can provide that to you. Administrative services performed under third-party contracts or agreements, and other costs for goods and services required for the administration of the program. You may also use it for training on ESG requirements, but the training must be a HUD-sponsored training, and if it's not a HUD-sponsored training, you cannot use ESG funds to pay for it. And the final thing would be your environmental review.
Okay, the next step is your match requirement. Applicants are required to match 100% of their grant requests, which can include cash resources provided any time after the start date of the contract with the Commonwealth and incurred prior to the deadline of the contract. Match contribution must meet all requirements that apply to ESG funds, expended in accordance with the regulatory guidelines. Match will be required documentation when submitting an invoice. Final invoices will not be approved until match is satisfied. The state will transfer its benefit of not matching the first $100,000 of grant funded by assisting subrecipients that are least capable of providing matching contributions. The criteria used to define the neediest provider is annual operating budget of the agency of less than $100,000 and serving an area with predominantly low and moderate income persons. More than 60% of LMI population based on the 2010 census.
Let me just jump in. We had a technical assistance phone call last month, and there was some confusion as to the match requirement. So I'm going to let Stacy and Mike, who did the technical assistance call, clarify the information on that match.
I think the concern was was a service-oriented match, is what people were referring to, and they were using a grant, CDBG grant, and some of their qualifications was that a client could have 80% of the AMI, which would really make that part of the CDB grant match ineligible because it must stay within the ESG guidelines, which is 30% of AMI. So we had sort of alluded that it was service, even though they were providing service to the client, but it must still be into the ESG guidelines.
So if that client is 31% in AMI, then you would not be able to use that client as match in that particular program for CDBG. Their client is, I believe, AMI was 80%. So if you're using match, if whatever you're using for match, the client cannot be more than 30%. If it's 31%, you cannot use that client as match for ESG. So again, we apologize for misunderstanding.
And we're going to send out an email to everyone who participated in, or at least registered for the technical assistance phone call to provide some clarification on that. Go ahead.
What the issue is whether between the 30% and the 80%. The 30% is only relative if your client is homeless prevention. If they are rapid rehousing, there is no income limitation. But then the question comes in, if the client has more than 30% income AMI, they actually have the resources necessary to get into an apartment, and so they're not really literally homeless. So that's the clarification and the difference between ESG and CDBG is if you have a person that has more than 30% AMI and they're presenting as being rapid rehousing, they're really not because they're not literally homeless. They have the resources to get into an affordable unit. So that's the clarification. And so if you are matching with CDBG funds, you need to be aware of that.
And what cannot be considered as match is COC funds, SNAP benefits, housing choice vouchers, home TBRA funds in most instances, tenant-based rental assistance, depreciation of buildings, and tenant's portion of rent. They cannot be considered as match.
And I want to clarify the CSC funds. I understand that was some issues after the technical assistance call. What that is some of your old SHP funds, operating funds that you may still be using. Some of that are not eligible as match with ESG. Also, if by chance in any of your COC money, even the new, that you are using ESG as a match to your COC, you can't do the reverse. You can't have them both being matched to each other. So that's why we have that on there as CFC funds, so that you look at exactly, what CFC funds you have. And again, it has to meet the same activities as ESG and the same qualifications. There is some difference in, I believe, the homeless definition between CFC and ESG, so you do need to be careful of that if you are going to use CFC funds as match.
you see on the screen now is our sample evaluation criteria form, and I just want to point out that the form is incorrect again this year in terms of the maximum number of points that you can get from your application. On the form it says a maximum of 160. That should have been changed to 205. So what we'll do after the webinar is we'll email, an email will come from Mike Kelly, which will have the correct form on there with the correct point amount that's allowable on this evaluation criteria form. And basically these, the next two slides show the everything that your application will be evaluated on. And so you want to make sure that you pay attention to this and ensure that the information that you provide in your application meets the criteria for the points so that you could get the maximum points allowable for each of the categories. And I won't go through, each one, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that these areas are important in your application. The next slide will show the COC review checklist, which we developed in coordination with the COCs last year. And this is a form that is filled out by the continuum of care that provides DCED information as to whether or not the applicant is an active participant in the continuum of care and that they are knowledgeable and aware of the programs that you're providing and that those programs are in coordination with what the COC's priorities are. So this is a checklist, and at the bottom of the form you'll see that you're given points depending on the response from the COC, and then we use this under the on the sample evaluation criteria under coordination. You can get up to 15 points on this COC review checklist in support of your application, and that would come directly from the continuum of care, the chairs of the continuum of care. So you can find our application. Again, here's a link for the application, and we went over the process. If you weren't on the call at the time, you just need to log in or register as a new user, and then you'll be make sure you put ESG on the application so that it can be routed to the right office. On the next slide, there's a example of the ESG application and all of the components that are included. You want to make sure that you fill it out in its entirety. Each area, and particularly make sure under B, it has the continuum of care information. Make sure that you put that information. You should know who your co-chairs are of the continuum of care. If you don't, you want to find out right away. Next slide is your the resolution. Again, you want to make sure you fill out all components and that the chief elected official of the applicant signs it, which would be, in most instances, is the county commissioner or the mayor if it's a city. You cannot have any executive directors or nonprofits of a nonprofit, or the person that prepared the application may not sign this. The next slide is your statement of assurances that you would sign, and again, this is a form that is signed by the chief elected official and not by an executive director or nonprofit agency or the person that prepared your application. The signature page of the ESA application, the resolution page, and the statement of assurances. These are all the pages that you would mail to DCED and have them postmarked by July 31st.
Okay, the next form is your management standards. A, applicants must attach an organizational chart of the departments, agencies, or third-party contractors who will be involved in the management of the ESG program. So that will be attached as attachment A. This chart must show the flow of responsibilities for all aspects of the program: application, preparation, contracting, environmental reviews, monitoring, invoices, habitability, and lead inspection, case management, closeouts, etc. B, capacity and experience related to proposed activities. On this section, we ask you to list the programs that are similar or relevant to an ESG program. So list your most recent work you've had and then work backwards. Add as much detail to demonstrate your capacity to run the program. Continuing on number 2, you list the current staff positions and qualifications of individuals who will carry out the grant or project activities. Again, be as detailed as you can. We said it's a very competitive process, so we want you to list all your staff members, all their experience, the hours of the program, the amount of hours they're going to work actually on the ESG program. C, if the applicant is applying to administer rental assistance, describe your experience again in inspecting housing units for both habitability and lead-based paint compliances. We ask you to attach a copy of the inspection form you use or describe your plans for partnership with inspection experience and attach a copy of this inspection tool. Complete the following charts for D. Completing the following charts dealing with performance measurements for the applicants. There's number of households served, average cost per household expended, number of households moved to permanent housing, collaborative efforts to establish support from mainstream reports. List as many of these as you possibly can to make your application look strong. E, please attach the conflict of interest policy. Now, a lot of people have policies and procedure manual. We do not need the entire manual, just the conflict of interest policy would be suffice. Program design. This we feel, is one of the most important parts of the application. This is where you are detailing your program and selling your program to us. Again, as we've said, it's a very, very competitive program. We want, with the most details, you can be scored the highest. So be specific, spare no details. If you have to add some, we've got some different forms you can add to this if you need more space. But for each component, try to get into, for street outreach, shelter, rehab, or rapid rehousing, or open, or homeless prevention, describe in detail as how you're going to spend the money, because again, as MJ stated, we're really, concerned about doing any clawback of any money. So make sure that all the money you're applying for, you will be able to spend. Program design. Summarize the programs that will be provided with ESG funds, including description of essential services to be provided, location of assistance, description or renovation to the complete and or what operational costs will be covered, including the summary type of service you intend to provide or subcontract using the categories above. Include a description of the range and services of an estimated average cost or explanation of a national target number of households. Example, 30 households will receive short-term rental assistance that will average $100 per month. Moving costs will average $115. Your assessment and case management. Everybody's program is different, but this is a very important tool that we look at when we come out on monitoring. So when your initial interview process, when you're dealing with your clients, we do ask you to attach that tool and send that in with your application. As I said, they're all different ones. The tool with the more detail is the better one. You're measuring performance. How will you measure performance of your street outreach or your emergency shelter? Objective outcomes and independent performance. Also on this measuring tool, please apply your monitoring the process of the program. Basically break down your goals of your program, what your timetable is, your invoicing process, how you're going to invoice. We ask that you invoice whether quarterly, but monthly is also very helpful, and actually attach the tool where it shows how you are monitoring the ESG program. The rapid rehousing and homeless prevention. Here again, you're going to describe the details, the needs of your community for either rapid rehousing assistance, homeless prevention. Include factual data such as the income, population numbers, unemployment, percentages, occupancy of shelter, point in time count, that identifies the need type of populations that need to be served with ESG funding. Describe the detailed populations you plan to target with ESG funds and explain why they were chosen over others. What is your plan to outreach to your target population? Summarizing the program that will provide with ESG funds, including for collaboration, the role of the lead agency and of the partnership agencies. Including this summary, the types of services you intend to provide or subcontract under the categories above. Include a description of the range of services and an estimate of average cost and of explanation of nations of target numbers of households. Again, examples, 30 households receive short-term rental that will average $100 per month. Moving costs will average $115. If applicable, how your program provides an assistance to rapid rehousing persons who are homeless by serving these households most in need of temporary assistance and most likely to achieve housing once this assistance is terminated. If applicable, how your program provides prevention assistance to households who otherwise become homeless by serving households most in need of temporary assistance and most likely to achieve stable housing once this assistance terminates. Again, the assessment and case management describe how you plan to assess for each household applying for assistance to eligibility and appropriateness for this program. Your process must include your consultation with a case manager or other authorized representative who can determine the appropriate assistance, attach a copy of the assessment tool you currently use, and use this as attachment C. Also describe the process you will be verifying documenting the eligibility of program participants for persons receiving assistance longer than 3 months. Describe the process that will follow to meet the ESG program requirements to case management, reevaluation of needs, and mainstreaming of resources to aid in the stabilization of the household. Get separate descriptions or processes for rapid rehousing and or homeless prevention clients. Explain how the applicant's agency or third-party contracts will determine that the household has reached stability to the program and the process for exit from the program. Please attach the applicant's agency and or third-party contract termination policy for participants that do not meet the program's qualifications or become ineligible during the course of the program. This is attachment A. This is attachment F. If you're applying for rapid housing fund, describe your process for determining specific types and levels of assistance you will provide to each household accepted into your program. List any limitations placed on assistance and reasoning. For example, only providing a maximum of $2,000 in rental assistance in a 3-year period. Based on the county's residents' experience, this is the maximum needed to reach stability. If you're applying for homeless prevention funds, describe your process for determining the specific type and levels of assistance you will provide to each household acceptance into your program. List any limitations placed on assistance and reasoning. For example, only providing a maximum of $2,000 total rent in assistance of 3-year period based on the county's experience. This is the maximum needed to reach stability.
Question is, please expand on the requirement of competitive bidding process for housing and redevelopment authorities administering the program, and could the nonprofit arm of the redevelopment and housing authorities be the vendor? Basically, the administrator, they must have a competitive bid process if a housing authority or redevelopment authority will be the administrator of the program. You have to go out for bid, and that would be the only way that you can allow them to be the administrators. The second part of the question is, as long as it's truly a nonprofit with a 501c3 certification, as the vendor, they could be the vendor of the program. The other question is, how do you rank applications? If the application is only for one activity, such as emergency shelter, but not for any of the other activities. One of the things that if you're applying for one activity, such as emergency shelter, you have to go back to what we had discussed as our priorities. And so the priority for shelters is not necessarily operations costs, but ensuring that, like, if the renovations, that you have any code deficiencies, or if you're increasing your bed capacity, if the shelter has any health and safety issues, if you need energy conservation, or in order to make the shelter ADA compliant. What we've noticed when we've gone out to monitor agencies, we've encountered a lot of shelters that were not ADA compliant, and we recommended to those agencies that if they come in for funding again for that particular shelter, that their priority would need to be to make them ADA compliant, either through help from DCED, or the agency would have to be in compliance prior with some other funding source and prove to us that they are now meeting the requirement. So we look at what the priorities are under the shelter program, and priority is not necessarily operations. Evaluation criteria if you go back to the sample evaluation criteria form, we give points, so our point system would come into play for the evaluation of projects if you're not applying for more than one of the activity types.
The next form is going to be on your timeliness form. On this form, you must show the number of persons you expect to serve for each type of assistance in ESG, as well as your match fund. If you have rental assistance, you must have service costs. That's because every person receiving rental assistance must receive case management. In the past, this has been a lot of errors because some of our grantees were not including service costs when filling out this form. So when you're providing rental assistance, you must show service costs as well. As mentioned earlier, that this is one of the forms that was adjusted from 8 quarters to 6 quarters to reflect the change in the 18-month contract period. Again, this form is the number of persons that is based on you serve for each, that you would put in for each quarter. So the next one would be the drawdown amount. The form shows the number of, based on the dollar amount. This should show the drawdown for each quarter. Again, this form is changed from due to the 18 months from the 12 down to 6. The plan is to spend each quarter. The amount should not be equal. They should be like a bell curve. So your first drawdown normally shouldn't be a large amount. Each quarter should gradually increase and then decrease once you get to the end of the drawdown or the end of the contract period. The next form is your coordination of services. The first part, the top section, should be the agency that is active in the program. This section should show who is going to help run the program. If it's only going to be the grantee, then that's all that should be in this section. That section should show all the resources who are assisting and helping with ESG, but not getting paid through ESG. This list should be a long list. A lot of resources, and I believe there should be an extra sheet if needed, if you need more space on here. And the third section is for...
Just to go back to the homelessness services and mainstream linkages, you're basically showing us the other entities that are going to be involved with providing services to the clients that you're providing services to. So how are you linking them to mainstream resources, which are other entities that can provide whatever services they need in order to help them become stable?
The third section is for HMIS. Are you reporting in HMIS, or do you have your own? your own system for reporting to track your data. If you're reporting domestic violence clients, do not have to report an HMIS, but you must send your own data.
Before we get to the project budget, I want to just go over some questions that are popping up here. Is there any documentation required to show COC coordination, or should this be described in the narrative? You can describe it in the narrative, but also we're going to get, so that would come from the agency, but then also we're going to get that form, the checklist from the COC. So between the two of those, your narrative and the COC form, we'll be able to determine coordination.
To be working with the client until they are stable. Again, where I have to emphasize, we put out an ESG application every year. So again, if you have 75% of your money spent, you know, you could very easily have money available the next year to pick up those people that might need the 24 months.
The residency requirement, what we're trying to do is prevent agencies from establishing a residency requirement in order to provide services to a client. If you have someone who is in need of shelter, then you want to provide services for that client regardless of where they're coming from. So if you do not have a residency requirement, then you get the most points on our scoring criteria. If you do have a residency requirement and you're willing to wait within a certain number of hours to allow the client to enter the shelter, for instance, we have it up to 24 hours, then you get a certain number of points. 25 to 72 hours, you get less points. So the longer you wait to allow a client to enter into your shelter, the less points you get on your application.
And that's a client. Some areas you have to be a resident of the city or a resident of that county, and that's what Madra is saying is if you have no residency requirement, then you would get most points. If you have to wait 2 days before you can open that free bed up to somebody who is not from that area, then you lose points. And of course, if you refuse to allow anybody that does not have residency, then you get no points.
And do residency requirements apply for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention?
Yes, both.
If I do not plan to apply for shelter or street outreach funds, does that section still need to be filled out? And the answer is no.
And let me clarify back when you say about the residency requirement. The residency requirement is what you put on. We're not requiring you to have a residency requirement. We're actually wanting you not to have one. So let me clarify that.
Okay, there's another comment. I won't read that one. Please further explain the procurement of the administrator. Is it actual bids or RFP or RFQ? These are two different procurement methods.
It goes by the grantee's procurement method. Since that is a service, it can be done by an RFQ, but you must depend on what the county code, township code, city code requires, or some, our what's it called? Home rule. Sorry, I had a blank there. If you're a home rule, you might have it different. So it's whatever your procurement for services. Administrator is considered a service, And so it follows that procurement method.
I think there was another question came through. Would we use the HMIS line for data entry by the agencies, or is this for the HMIS lead?
No, the HMIS line is for your person in your office or people in the vendors that enter the information, into the HMIS system. The state takes out our own funds from the ESG for our lead, to be the HMIS lead. So this would be your funds for your people in your office.
Okay. Now we're going to continue with the project budget. This form should have the amount that you propose to spend in each category, and it's an estimate, so you can pretty much use your budget from your previous ones to help you, how much you're going to spend. This form is pre-populated, so it'll do the math for you. So you'll just plug in the numbers, and it'll total up, to the bottom to whatever your total money that you'll be asking for. And this also includes your match. The match must be at least 100% of what you're asking for ESG.
So as Stacy said, you want to go back and look at what you've expended in previous years when you do your project budget. You don't want to just say, okay, we need $100,000 in each one of these categories, and we're going to apply for that amount. Or you don't want to apply for rapid rehousing funds because you know that's a priority when you know you're not going to use the rapid rehousing funds. If you're going to apply for funding, please go back and look at what you've spent over the years on this project, and then also look at your PIT data and see what your homelessness numbers are like in your areas, and then use that to determine how much money you anticipate needing for the 18 months to provide services.
Yeah, and to reiterate what Stacy and Madra both have said, in the past, we've now got 4 years under our belt of the new program, and I think some are out there saying, well, this is how much match we have, so this is how much we're going to apply for. That is not the way to determine your need. You need to look at your PIT count. You need to look at how many bed nights you have, how many people are coming through your door asking for assistance in the last year, things like that, and, apply for what is your need. Last year we saw some agencies ask for $500,000 worth of assistance, which means there's $500,000 worth of match, and in previous years they'd only maybe had spent $200,000. Well, unless the industry is closed or there's some reason why, which should be identified in your needs, why you would have this massive increase in the needs of rapid rehousing, you don't need to be putting in just because you have that much match. You really need to base it on your need. And I'll tell you, too, while we're evaluating these programs, we do look at your past experience and how much money we've had to recapture in the past. And we will use that as a evaluation tool.
I want to acknowledge that it's almost 12 o'clock. I know we don't have too much longer, but I guess with the confusion that we had in getting knocked offline and everything, we're a little bit behind. But we're going to move forward and just a couple more slides, and then we'll be finished.
And then the next page for the project budget is the project budget narrative. This page should basically show the detail of your project budget. Be specific on what you're spending under each category, and you must include your match as well with this. But again, I think Madra stated earlier, it does not have to be the line by line for the match. If if there's a category in a certain area, that match does not have to show in that that same category.
You just have to have the total dollar match amount.
And I just want to emphasize in here, and I don't know if it's been stated before, but we have instituted with the 2014 money that you cannot, if you submit your invoice, you cannot ask for more than 3.75% of the admin with that invoice. So there will be no more asking for all your admin up front. Or having one invoice just for admin. We ran into some problems at the end of the grant where people are, we're recapturing money, but they've spent all their admin, and then you're going to have to pay that part of the admin back. So this is our way of making sure that we don't have to recapture money.
And then if you submit an invoice for $7,000, make sure you have $7,000 a match shown on the invoice. The last thing that we have is the ESG attachment forms. If you're applying for grant funds, you want to make sure that you go through all of the attachments and that you have all of the attachments included in the ESA system. You upload them into the system so that we are able to see them when we pull your application. If you do not have these forms submitted with the application, your application will be considered incomplete and it won't be funded. If for some reason you have difficulty getting the application forms or getting these forms uploaded into the system, make sure you contact our customer service area and they'll help you. If you wait till the last minute to try to do it, you may not be able to submit them in time. So just a word of caution, make sure you allow adequate time for submitting of the forms.
We have some resources that you could go to, ESG resources for specific programs. Up on the screen here, oh, there we go. For specific program information, you can go to the link on the screen here. ESG Solution Grant, there's HUD guidance, tools, technical assistance, and question and answer resources. Also, some additional resources on the interim rule that any applicant can use for their disposal. You can go to these sites as well regarding interim interim emergency solution grant regulations.
The last screen shows, or there's two more pages actually. There's the ESG resources that you can contact any of us if you're having problems with programmatic submission of information or you just have questions related to the application. There should be another slide. And then for compliance and reporting with IDIS questions, you contact Christina Powell, Environmental Review, Christine Howard, John Cherry, and HMIS-related information. You can contact David Wethington.
Just as clarification, you will not be contacting Tina Powell. You will no longer be using IDIS. You will submit your invoices to the office, and we take care of IDIS.
Well, they can still contact her for questions. Okay, so anyway, there's a couple more questions. Just verifying if we select a nonprofit as our subrecipient and they are going to provide the case management, rental assistance, et cetera, do we have to go through some type of procurement process to select them as a subrecipient? You don't have to go through a procurement process to select your subrecipients. However, you should make notice of award availability to any agency that could potentially provide services through the grant. If we have no residency requirements, then someone from another county technically could apply for homelessness prevention assistance, and our county would need to accept the application and provide the service and match. Yes.
ESG funds are not county, township, city specific. You are addressing the homeless situation as they present themselves to you. So if you do not have a residency requirement, then you can address any homeless person.
How can nonprofits get access to the PDF fillable forms? Well, you wouldn't necessarily need them. The nonprofits could get the application off of our website, but you wouldn't need the fillable forms. The fillable forms are in our ESA system, and that would be for the entity that is applying for the funds. So they could give you access if they're allowing you to submit their application, but other than that, you wouldn't have access to them. Does the match need to be drawn relative to the category that the money was spent in? In other words, can we potentially have more match in the admin column than spent for admin? And the answer is yes. You could have more match in admin. The match does not need to be drawn relative to the category. It just needs to be an eligible match.
But just a clarification, that admin must be admin running the ESG programs. It's not admin of your entire agency. So I want to clarify that because, you know, some people run a number of programs. You might run CSBG, weatherization, some of your other that, and it is not the entire admin of your agency. It is only that is applying for ESG.
To calculate the percent that must be spent on rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, do we deduct HMIS as well as the 3.75% for admin?
There is no percentage. That 45% was just letting you know how much of our allocation out there will go as a minimum. We are required by statute to spend no more than 60% of our funding on shelter and street outreach. So the rest of it would then go, in other words, we can't spend more than 60%. So we have identified 45% to go toward rapid rehousing.
What do we do if the total application package exceeds the 1.5 number of files? Last year, we could not fit the application into the single application. There are a lot of documents you want as attachments, too. One thing I would say is to go back to the application, the guidelines, and reread what's in there and see if what you're submitting in the single application is more than what we're asking for. Yes, we ask for a lot of attachments. Some of them are specific to shelter and not necessarily the rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention program. So if you're not applying for shelter, you would not submit those forms, those attachments. But the other thing is that you could potentially, if all of the documentation that you're trying to submit is really required, then you could potentially zip your file and try to upload it into ESA, or you can contact our customer service and get some assistance there.
I think to reiterate, like Madrid said earlier, if we're asking for the conflict of interest clause or the part of your personnel files that have conflict of interest, that's all we're asking for. We're not asking for your entire personnel policy. So, yes, go back and look and give us only what we're asking for.
And we have had agencies apply for every category, and they were able to get all of their documentation submitted into the allowable space. That's all of the questions that I see so far. If anyone else has any questions you want to ask now, because we are...
I have to open the... They're going to ask any questions?
Well, they're asking questions through the chat box.
Oh, okay.
Is the webinar available after today? Yes, the webinar will be available. We have to convert the file, and then we'll get it posted up on our website. That should be within the next week. Okay, sometime within, or sometime next week it'll be available.
We'll send a notice out as it's available.
Will it have the updates? I'm not sure what updates. Can you be more specific?
Some of the forms.
If you're referring to the forms, the form sample evaluation criteria, we're going to send that out today after the webinar with the corrected information, which will show the 205 allowable points. However, if you look at the categories on the form that is included in the guidelines, the only thing that's incorrect is the total at the top, but everything else within it adds up to, if you take the maximum number of points that are allowable in each category, it'll add up to the 205. We can, you're asking for the information that has been updated since the slides were created. We can try to get that modified, but it might take a little longer than us being able to put it up immediately after the webinar.
Then I'd be talking about the customer service, the single application.
If it's the single application you're referring to, those forms will not be updated. Difficulties.